Her family left her to freeze to death. Then a mountain man chose her as his wife. The night Clara Whitmore learned her family could leave her to die, the snow was falling so hard it erased the trail behind them. It covered the wagon tracks, buried the hoofprints, and softened every cruel sound until the whole Montana wilderness felt like one white grave. She had always believed blood meant loyalty. By sunrise, she would learn that some hearts could turn colder than winter itself. The year was 1879, and the high country above Helena, Montana, had already taken 3 men that season. Folks in town said the mountains had moods like a living thing. Some days they stood blue and shining under the sun. Other days they swallowed roads, cabins, horses, and men without leaving a sign. Clara had heard those warnings all her life, but she had never feared the mountains the way she feared the voices coming from the front seat of the wagon. She lay beneath a thin quilt in the back, shaking so badly her teeth clicked together. Fever burned in her bones, yet the cold still found its way through her dress, through the quilt, and through every breath she tried to take. Her hands were stiff, her lips had cracked. Every bump of the wagon sent pain through her body. Her older brother, Elias Whitmore, held the reins with his shoulders hunched against the storm. Beside him sat his wife, Ruth, wrapped in a brown wool shawl, her face tight with anger and fear. They had left Helena 3 days earlier, saying they were headed west to start over. But Clara knew the truth. Elias was running. Their father had died that spring and left behind a small mercantile store, 2 wagons, and enough money to keep them safe if they were careful. Elias had not been careful. He had lost most of it at card tables and borrowed the rest from a dangerous cattle broker named Wade Mercer. Wade owned half the saloons in Helena and had men who collected debts with cold eyes and hard hands. When Elias could not pay, he loaded what was left of the family goods into the wagon and fled before dawn. Clara had been too sick to argue. She had begged him to wait 1 more day, but Ruth said waiting would get them killed. So Clara was placed in the back with sacks of flour, a cracked trunk, 2 blankets, and a promise from Elias that he would not let anything happen to her. Now that promise sounded like a lie. "She cannot keep going," Ruth said from the front, her voice carrying back through the storm. "Look at her, she has not sat up since yesterday." Elias did not answer. "The horse is tired, Elias. The road is climbing. We are nearly out of food. If Mercer's men are behind us, they will catch us before the pass." "She is my sister," Elias said, but his words were weak, like he only said them because he knew he should. "She is a dying girl in the back of a wagon," Ruth snapped. "And if we all die because of her, your father's name will not matter." Clara closed her eyes. She wanted to rise and tell them she could walk. She wanted to say she would not be a burden, but her body would not obey her. Her throat felt raw, her head swam, her fingers clutched the quilt while fear crawled through her chest. The wagon rolled on for another hour before the horse stumbled. Elias cursed and pulled the reins. The wagon stopped beneath a wall of tall pines. Wind pushed snow sideways across the road. Somewhere in the distance, a branch cracked under the weight of ice. "We make camp here," Elias said. Ruth climbed down without looking back at Clara. Elias unhitched the horse and led it toward the trees. Clara tried to sit up, but the world turned dark at the edges. She heard Ruth moving near the fire, heard the scrape of a tin cup, heard low voices. After a while, Ruth climbed into the back of the wagon and held out a cup. "Drink," she said. "It will warm you." Clara looked at her sister-in-law. Ruth's eyes were dry and sharp. There was no kindness in them, but Clara was too thirsty to refuse. She took the cup with both hands. The broth was thin, salty, and bitter under the heat. She swallowed it anyway. Elias stood near the tailgate, half hidden by snow and shadow. "Elias," Clara whispered, "are we almost through the pass?" He looked at her for 1 second, then looked away. "Rest now," he said. "You need sleep." Something in his voice frightened her more than the storm. Clara tried to speak again, but her tongue felt heavy. The cup slipped from her fingers, her arms sank to the quilt, Ruth's face blurred, the trees blurred, the fire became a soft orange smear. The last thing Clara heard before darkness took her was the sound of Ruth saying, "We leave before dawn." When Clara opened her eyes, the world was silent. At first she thought she was still dreaming. Snow pressed against the quilt. Cold air cut into her lungs. She blinked and saw gray morning light over a forest buried in white. The wagon was gone. The horse was gone. Elias and Ruth were gone. Clara pushed herself up with a weak cry. Her body screamed in pain. Snow slid from her shoulders and dress. She was lying under a pine tree, wrapped only in the same thin quilt. Beside her sat a tin cup, a broken biscuit, and nothing else. For a moment she could not understand it. Her mind fought against the truth. Maybe Silas had gone for help. Maybe the wagon had rolled ahead and would return. Maybe there had been some mistake. Then she saw the tracks. Deep wagon ruts led away through the trees, already filling with snow. Clara stared at them until the truth settled inside her like a stone. Her brother had drugged her. Her own family had lifted her from the wagon and left her under a tree in the dead of winter. They had given her a biscuit like a kindness, as if a dying girl could eat it before the cold took her. "Silas," she called. Her voice broke apart in the empty air. "Silas." Only the wind answered. Clara stumbled to her feet. The quilt fell from her shoulders, and the cold struck her with such force that she nearly fell again. She grabbed the tree trunk and held on. Tears filled her eyes, but even crying hurt. The tears froze along her lashes while she looked down the trail where her brother had disappeared. She had loved Silas once. When they were children, he had carried her across creeks and saved her the last piece of apple pie. When their mother died, he had sat beside her bed and promised Clara she would never be alone. That boy was gone. The man he became had left her to freeze so he could run faster. Clara wrapped the quilt around her shoulders and began to walk. Each step was torture. Snow reached past her ankles, then to her shins where the drifts were deep. Her boots were thin and cracked. Her dress dragged through the white powder. She followed the wagon ruts because there was nothing else to follow. Somewhere ahead was the road. Somewhere beyond that was the pass. Somewhere beyond the pass was a chance to live. But the mountains did not care about chances. By noon, Clara could no longer feel her feet. Her breath came in small, painful pulls. Her fever made strange pictures move at the edge of her sight. She saw her father standing beside the old store, holding out his arms. She saw lantern light in the windows of home. She smelled coffee and fresh bread. Then the wind would hit her face and the visions would vanish. The wagon tracks grew faint. Snow covered them. Clara stopped in the middle of the trail, turning in a slow circle. Tall pines stood all around her like dark judges. The sky was low and gray. The storm was coming again. "No," she whispered. "Please, no." She tried to keep walking, but her knees gave out. She fell hard into the snow. For a while she crawled. Her hands burned, then went numb. The quilt caught on roots and tore at the edge. When she reached a fallen log, she pulled herself beside it and curled into a small shape, trying to hide from the wind. Her body began to feel warm, which scared her because she knew it was not real warmth. She had heard old trappers talk about that feeling. When the cold started to feel gentle, death was close. Clara pressed her cheek against the quilt and looked at the white forest through half-closed eyes. "I am sorry, Pa," she whispered. "I tried." The snow fell softer now. The world faded to gray. Clara's eyes closed. Far up the ridge, a man named Elias Boone stopped beside his trap line and turned his face toward the wind. Elias was 36, broad as a barn door, with a dark beard, rough hands, and a bearskin coat that made him look like part of the mountain itself. He lived alone in a cabin above Wolf Creek, where most men were too afraid to build. Folks in the valley called him wild. Some called him dangerous. He did not mind. He trusted trees more than people and silence more than promises. He had been checking traps since morning, but something was wrong. The storm had covered most tracks, yet he noticed fresh wagon marks cutting through the lower trail. They were deep and hurried. A wagon had passed fast, too fast for weather like this. Then he saw something that made him narrow his eyes. Small footprints. Not a man's boots, not a minor S, a woman S. They stumbled away from the wagon trail and vanished toward the trees. Elias followed them. The footprints grew messy. Then they became hand marks in the snow, then nothing. He pushed through low branches, his breath steaming in the cold air, until he saw a torn strip of blue cloth caught on a bush. A few yards beyond it, beside a fallen log, he found her. For 1 second, Elias did not move. The woman lay curled under a ragged quilt, half covered in snow. Her hair had come loose around her pale face. Her lips were blue. Her hands were stiff against her chest. She looked like the mountain had already claimed her. Elias dropped to his knees and pulled off one glove. He pressed his fingers to her neck. There was a pulse. Weak, but there. His jaw tightened. "Whoever left you here ought to answer to God," he muttered. He wrapped her in his bearskin coat, lifted her as if she weighed no more than a child, and carried her against his chest. The trail back to his cabin was steep and cruel. Snow blew into his beard. His boots sank deep. More than once the wind shoved him sideways, but Elias did not slow down. By late afternoon, he reached his cabin tucked against the side of a rocky hill. Smoke curled from the stone chimney. He kicked open the door, carried Clara inside, and laid her on a buffalo robe near the hearth. The cabin smelled of pine smoke, leather, coffee, and dried herbs. Elias built the fire higher but kept her back from the strongest heat. He had seen men die from being warmed too fast. He rubbed her hands with wool, wrapped her feet, and forced a little warm tea past her lips when she stirred. Hours passed. Night came. The storm pressed against the cabin walls like it wanted her back. Near midnight, Clara opened her eyes. The first thing she saw was firelight on rough timber beams. The second thing she saw was the shadow of a huge man sitting near the hearth, sharpening a knife with slow, steady strokes. Fear shot through her. She tried to sit up, but pain pulled her down. The man looked over. "Easy," he said. His voice was deep and calm. "You are safe." Clara pulled the fur tighter around herself. "Where am I?" "My cabin." "Who are you?" "Elias Boone." She stared at him, trembling. "Did Silas send you?" His face hardened. "No one sent me. I found you dying in the snow." The memory returned so fast it stole her breath. The broth, Ruth's eyes, Silas looking away, the empty trail. Clara covered her mouth, but a sob broke through anyway. Elias stood and brought her a tin cup. "Drink slow," he said. "Your body has been through hell." She took the cup with shaking hands. "My brother left me." "I figured as much." Clara looked at him through tears. "He was all the family I had." Elias' eyes moved to the window where snow beat against the glass. "Then he was not family." Those words cut deep because they were true. Clara drank the warm tea and silence settled between them. She was alive, but she had no home, no money, no coat, and no one looking for her except maybe the dead men chasing Silas. She looked at the stranger across the fire. He was rough, frightening, and silent, yet he had done what her own blood had not done. He had carried her out of death. "What happens to me now?" she asked. Elias did not answer right away. He placed the knife on the table and looked at her with dark, steady eyes. "Your brother is running from Wade Mercer," he said. "Mercer's men came through Wolf Creek 2 days ago asking about a Whitmore wagon. If they find you alone, they will use you to pull Silas out of hiding. If the cold does not kill you, men like that will." Clara's hands tightened around the cup. "Then I have nowhere to go." The fire cracked between them. Elias stepped closer, his face unreadable. "There may be one way," he said. Clara looked up. Elias reached into a small wooden box on the mantel and took out a plain silver ring. He held it in his rough palm, where it caught the firelight. "I need a wife on paper before spring," he said. "The land agent is trying to take my cabin and valley, saying a lone man has no right to hold this much homestead land. A married man can keep it. You need shelter and protection. I need a lawful wife." Clara stared at the ring, unable to breathe. "You want me to marry you?" she whispered. "I am offering you my name," Elias said. "Not chains, not cruelty. You take my name and no man touches you while I am breathing. You will have a roof, food, and the right to stay alive." Outside, the storm roared across the mountain. Inside, the ring shone in his open hand. Clara had been thrown away by the people who should have loved her. Now a stranger was offering her the one thing her family had stolen. A chance. She reached for the ring with trembling fingers. Part 2. Clara looked at the ring in Elias Boone's hand as if it were a piece of fire. It was small, plain, and worn smooth by time, but to her it felt heavier than any gold in Montana. A day earlier, she had belonged to a family that left her under a tree to die. Now a man she did not know was asking her to take his name so both of them could survive. Her fingers shook as she touched the ring. It was cold at first, but the longer she held it, the more it warmed in her palm. "I do not love you," she said in a weak voice. Elias nodded once. "I did not ask you to." "I do not know how to be a wife." "You know how to live," he said. "That is enough for now." Clara looked at his face. It was rough, hard, and shadowed by the fire, but there was no trick in his eyes. Silas had looked away when he betrayed her. Elias looked straight at her when he made his promise. That mattered. "If I say yes," she whispered, "you will not send me away when spring comes." "No," Elias said, "my word does not change with the weather." Clara closed her fingers around the ring. "Then yes," she said, "I will take your name." Elias did not smile. He only bowed his head a little, as if her answer carried weight. Then he took the ring from her and slid it onto her finger with surprising care. His hand was large and scarred, but his touch was gentle. "You sleep now," he said. "Tomorrow we ride to Wolf Creek." Clara wanted to ask more, but her strength failed. She sank back into the fur and closed her eyes. For the first time since Silas had drugged her broth, she slept without fearing she would wake under snow. The ride to Wolf Creek was slow and bitter. Elias wrapped Clara in 2 heavy furs and placed her in front of him on his big black horse. The animal moved with steady steps through the snow, down narrow trails and between tall pines. Clara leaned against Elias' chest, too weak to sit alone. She could feel his heart beating through his coat, calm and strong. Wolf Creek was not much of a town. It had a small church, a general store, a blacksmith shed, a marshal's office, and 2 rows of rough cabins. Smoke rose from chimneys. Men stopped talking when Elias rode in with Clara in his arms. Women looked from windows. The whole town seemed to know that something strange had come down from the mountain. Elias carried Clara into the church, where Reverend Samuel Pike was fixing a broken stove. The old preacher looked up, surprised. "Boone," he said, "what storm blew you in?" "A wedding," Elias answered. The preacher looked from Elias to Clara. His eyes softened when he saw how pale she was. "Does the lady agree?" Clara lifted her chin. Her voice was not strong, but it was clear. "I do." Within an hour, Clara Whitmore became Clara Boone. There were no flowers, no music, and no family smiling from church benches. The witnesses were Reverend Pike's wife and the storekeeper, Mr. Abel Harris. Clara stood beside Elias in front of the small wooden cross, wrapped in a borrowed shawl. Her knees trembled so badly she feared she might fall. When the preacher asked Elias if he would protect and honor her, Elias answered in a deep voice that filled the little church. "I will." Clara believed him. After the wedding, Elias took her to the land office beside the store. A thin man named Mr. Tolliver sat behind a desk covered in papers. He did not seem pleased to see them. His narrow eyes moved to Clara's ring, then to Elias' face. "So it is true," Tolliver said. "You found yourself a wife." "I filed the marriage paper," Elias said. "Now mark my homestead safe." Tolliver dipped his pen in ink, but did not write yet. "Wade Mercer has interest in that valley," he said. "He claims you have not improved the land enough." "I built a cabin, a barn, a smokehouse, and fenced the lower meadow," Elias said. "The law is clear." Tolliver's mouth tightened. Law can be read in many ways. Elias placed both hands on the desk and leaned forward. The room went quiet. "Then read it honest." Mr. Tolliver looked away first. He wrote in the ledger, stamped the paper, and slid it across the desk. Elias folded the paper and tucked it inside his coat. Clara understood then that this marriage had not only saved her, it had blocked Wade Mercer from taking Elias home. As they left the office, Clara saw 2 men watching from across the street. One was tall and lean with a red scarf at his neck. The other had a crooked nose and a long coat. They did not smile. The man with the red scarf spat into the snow and turned away. Elias noticed them too. "Mercer's men?" Clara asked. "Most likely." "Will they follow us?" "Not today." The way he said it made Clara's stomach tighten. Winter held the mountain for many weeks after that. Snow buried the trail so deep that Wolf Creek became a memory below them. In Elias' cabin, Clara slowly returned to life. Her fever broke. Color came back to her cheeks. Her hands stopped shaking when she held a cup. Elias cooked venison stew, boiled pine tea, and kept the fire burning even when he had to walk into the storm for wood. He never treated her like property. He slept on a thick hide near the hearth and gave her the bed. He spoke little, but he always noticed what she needed. If her cup was empty, he filled it. If she shivered, he added wood. If she woke from a nightmare crying Silas's name, he did not ask questions. He only sat by the fire and waited until she could breathe again. At first, Clara feared the silence. Then she began to understand it. Elias was not cold, he was careful. He did not waste words because he had lived too long with only the mountains listening. As her strength grew, he taught her the life of the valley. He showed her how to cut kindling, how to hang herbs from the rafters, how to mend a torn snowshoe, and how to read clouds moving over the ridge. Clara learned where the creek ran under ice and which berries could heal a cough. She learned that elk moved before a storm and that wolves grew quiet when strangers came near. One morning, Elias placed a rifle on the table. Clara froze. "I do not want to hurt anyone," she said. "I hope you never have to," Elias replied, "but hope is not a wall." He took her outside and set empty tins on a fallen log. The rifle felt heavy in her arms. Her first shot missed so badly Elias raised one eyebrow. Clara almost laughed, and the sound surprised her. She had not laughed since before her father died. Elias adjusted her hands. He stood close behind her, not touching more than needed. "Do not fight the kick," he said. "Hold steady, breathe, choose your mark." Clara fired again. This time the tin jumped from the log. Elias nodded. "Good." That one word warmed her more than praise from anyone else could have. Days turned into weeks. Clara began to sew curtains from old flour sacks. She scrubbed the table until the wood shone. She made bread that came out too hard the first time and perfect the third. The cabin changed under her hands. It still belonged to the mountain, but now it felt less lonely. Elias changed too. He started bringing in small things from his trips, a blue ribbon from the store, a jar of peach preserves, a comb with a cracked handle. He never made a show of it. He simply left them on the table and went back outside. Clara kept each one like treasure. One evening, as snow tapped against the window, Clara found Elias carving a small wooden bird by the fire. "It is beautiful," she said. "My mother used to like birds," he said. Clara sat across from him. "Is the ring hers?" Elias looked at Clara's hand. The silver ring glowed soft in the firelight. "Yes," he said. "My father gave it to her before they crossed into Montana. She died when I was 15. "I am sorry." He gave a slow nod. "My father died 2 winters after. Fever took him. After that, I learned people leave, even when they do not mean to." Clara looked down. "Some leave because they choose to." Elias set the carving aside. "Your brother's choice was his shame, not yours." Those words loosened something in her chest. Clara covered her face and cried, not like the night under the tree, but like someone finally safe enough to break. Elias did not rush her. When she lowered her hands, he held out a clean cloth. "I keep thinking I should hate him," she whispered, "but mostly I just feel empty." "That will pass," Elias said. "One day you will wake and he will not be the first thing in your mind." "Has that happened to you?" "Sometimes." His honesty reached her in a quiet place. She looked at him then, really looked at him. This hard mountain man had carried grief for years and still found room to save her. He had offered protection without asking for her heart. Somehow that made her heart begin to move toward him. By early April, the snow started to soften. Water dripped from the roof. The creek broke open in silver lines. Clara walked farther each day, her boots leaving prints beside Elias. The valley below the cabin opened wide and beautiful, with pine trees, dark cliffs, and a meadow waiting under the last patches of snow. One afternoon, Elias took her to a ridge where they could see the whole homestead. "This is why Mercer wants it," he said. "Timber, water, grazing land, enough to make a rich man richer." Clara stood beside him, the wind lifting loose strands of her hair. "And enough to make a lonely man a home," she said. Elias turned to her. Something soft moved in his eyes. "It was not much of a home before you came." Clara's heart beat faster. "You saved my life, Elias." He shook his head. "You saved it after I found you. I only carried you inside." She stepped closer. "You gave me a name when mine had been made worthless." For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Elias lifted his hand and touched her cheek with the back of his fingers, as if asking without words. Clara did not pull away. She leaned into his touch. Their first kiss was gentle, quiet, and full of all the things neither of them knew how to say. It was not a bargain. It was not fear. It was the start of something real. After that day, the cabin felt different. Elias still slept by the hearth until Clara asked him not to. She was shy when she said it, and he was silent for so long she feared she had spoken wrong. Then he took her hand and kissed her knuckles. "As you wish, wife," he said. For the first time, the word wife did not feel like a shelter built from need. It felt like a promise chosen by both of them. But peace in the mountains never came without a shadow. One morning in late April, Clara woke before dawn to the sound of the horse stamping in the barn. Elias was already up, standing by the window with his rifle in hand. His face was still, but his eyes were sharp. "What is it?" Clara asked. He pointed toward the lower trail. Clara wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and looked out. At first, she saw only mist rising from the thawing ground. Then she saw them. Fresh hoofprints cut through the mud near the creek. Not one horse. 5. Elias opened the cabin door and stepped onto the porch. Clara followed, her heart already pounding. The morning air smelled of wet pine and danger. Down by the fence, tied to a post with a strip of red cloth, was a folded paper. Elias walked to it, took it down, and opened it. Clara watched his jaw tighten. "What does it say?" she asked. Elias handed her the paper. The words were rough and dark, written in a hard hand. "Send out the Whitmore girl and sign over the valley, or we burn the cabin with both of you inside." At the bottom was one name. Wade Mercer. Clara looked up at the trail as the sun rose pale behind the trees. Somewhere beyond the pines, men were waiting. Men who had followed Silas's debt into the mountains. Men who now wanted her, Elias, and the only home she had left. Elias took the paper from her hand and crushed it in his fist. "Get your rifle, Clara," he said. This time she did not tremble. Part 3. Clara took the rifle from the rack with steady hands. Only a few weeks ago, the weight of it had scared her. Now it felt like part of the life Elias had helped her build. She checked the chamber the way he had taught her, then stood beside him at the cabin door and looked out at the pale morning. The valley was quiet, but it was not peaceful. The birds had stopped singing. The horse in the barn kept shifting and snorting. Even the creek seemed to run softer, as if the whole mountain was listening for what would come next. Elias barred the door, then moved through the cabin with calm purpose. He closed the shutters, stacked wood under the windows, and placed extra bullets on the table. Clara watched him, feeling fear rise in her chest, but she did not let it rule her. Wade Mercer wanted her afraid. Silas had left her afraid. The cold had almost killed her afraid. She was done being that girl. By noon, the first rider appeared on the lower trail. Then another. Then 3 more. 5 men rode into the clearing, their horses stepping through mud and melting snow. At the front was Wade Mercer himself, dressed in a black coat with a fine hat pulled low over his brow. His face was smooth, handsome in a cruel way, and his eyes held the greedy shine of a man who thought everything in the world had a price. Beside him rode Silas. Clara's breath caught. Her brother looked thinner than before. His beard had grown wild and one eye was bruised. His coat was torn at the sleeve. Ruth sat behind another rider, her wrists tied in front of her, her face pale with fear. The sight of them should have filled Clara with joy that they were alive. Instead, it opened the old wound in her heart. Elias stepped onto the porch with his rifle resting in his hands. "You are on my land, Mercer," he said. Wade smiled, "Not for long. This deed is filed lawful. My marriage is filed lawful. You have no claim." Wade looked toward Clara, who stood in the doorway behind Elias. "So that is the frozen little sister," Wade said. "I was told she died." "She nearly did," Clara said, her voice clear. "No thanks to my family." Silas lifted his head. His eyes filled with tears the moment he saw her. "Clara," he cried, "thank God, I thought you were gone." "You left me under a tree," she said. "I had no choice," he said. "Mercer was chasing us. Ruth said we would all die." Ruth began to sob. "We were scared, Clara. We were starving." Clara looked at them both. Their fear was real, but so was what they had done. She remembered waking alone, the snow in her hair, the broken biscuit by her side, the wagon tracks leading away. "You gave me bitter broth," Clara said. "You waited until I could not fight, then you left me without a coat." Silas lowered his face. Wade laughed softly. "Family troubles are sad, but I did not come for tears. Boone, you sign over this valley, and I take the Whitmores away. refuse, and I drag all of you to the marshal with a story that says you stole a sick girl and forced her into marriage for land." "That is a lie," Clara said. Wade tipped his hat. "A lie told by rich men often walks farther than truth told by poor ones." Elias did not move. "You will not take her." Wade's smile faded. "Then I will take the land another way." One of his men swung down from his horse with a bottle in his hand and a rag stuffed into its neck. Clara saw what it was before he lit the match. Fire. They meant to burn the cabin and call it justice. Elias raised his rifle. "Drop it," he said. The man froze. Wade's hand twitched toward his pistol, but Clara was faster than fear. She stepped fully onto the porch, lifted her rifle, and aimed at the bottle. "Put it down," she said. Silas stared at her as if he did not know her. Maybe he did not. The sister he had left in the snow had been weak, fevered, and helpless. The woman standing now had crossed through death and come back with a mountain man's name and a mountain woman's fire. The hired man lowered the bottle slowly. Then Ruth screamed. A rider behind her had pulled a knife and cut her loose, not to free her, but to shove her forward as a shield. Ruth stumbled through the mud, crying Clara's name. At the same moment, Wade drew his pistol. The clearing broke into chaos. Elias fired first, not at a man, but at the branch above Wade's horse. The branch cracked and crashed down, spooking the animal. Wade's shot went wild and struck the porch rail. Clara ducked, then rose again, her heart hammering but her eyes sharp. She fired at the dirt near the feet of the man holding the fire bottle. Mud exploded upward. He dropped the bottle and ran for cover. Two of Mercer's riders tried to circle toward the barn. Elias moved like the mountain itself, strong and sure. He fired low, striking the ground near the horses and driving them back. The animals reared, throwing one rider into the mud and sending the other racing toward the trees. Wade cursed and turned his pistol toward Clara. Before he could fire, Silas threw himself at Wade's arm. The shot cracked into the sky. Wade struck Silas across the face and knocked him down, but that one desperate act gave Elias the opening he needed. He rushed from the porch, slammed Wade against the side of his horse, and tore the pistol from his hand. The two men struggled in the mud. Wade fought like a cornered wolf, but Elias was stronger. With one hard shove, he sent Wade crashing against a fence post. Wade fell and did not rise. Silence came slowly. The hired men who could still stand lifted their hands. Ruth dropped to her knees, shaking. Silas crawled through the mud, blood on his lip, staring at Clara with shame so deep it seemed to age him 10 years. Elias tied Wade and his men with rope from the barn. Then he turned to Clara. His shoulder was torn where a bullet had grazed his coat, but he stood tall. "You hurt?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "No." His eyes softened. "Good." Silas pushed himself to his knees. "Clara, please, I know what I did. I know I do not deserve mercy, but I am your brother." Clara walked down from the porch. The mud pulled at her boots. She stopped in front of him, looking at the man who had once carried her across creeks and later left her to die. "For a long time, I thought family was the people who shared your blood," she said. "Then blood left me in the snow, and a stranger carried me home." Silas wept quietly. "I am not going to ask Elias to hurt you," Clara said. "But you will answer to the marshal. You will tell the truth about Mercer, about the debt, and about what you did to me. If you lie, I will speak louder." Silas nodded, broken and silent. Ruth looked up with wet eyes. "Clara, what about me?" Clara's face trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "You made your choice beside that fire. Now you live with it." By evening, Elias rode into Wolf Creek with Wade Mercer, his men, Silas, and Ruth tied to their saddles. Clara rode beside him, wearing his mother's ring and carrying her rifle across her lap. The marshal listened to the truth. Reverend Pike and Mr. Harris spoke for the lawful marriage and the filed deed. Mr. Tolliver, pale and sweating, admitted Wade had paid him to twist the law. By nightfall, Wade Mercer was locked behind iron bars. Silas and Ruth were held for abandoning Clara and helping him run. The valley was safe. When Elias and Clara returned home the next morning, the sun was rising over the peaks. Snow still clung to the high ridges, but the meadow below the cabin shone with new grass. Clara stood on the porch and breathed in pine, smoke, and spring. Elias came beside her. "Do you regret it?" She looked at him. "Regret what?" "Taking my name." Clara touched the silver ring on her finger. Then she looked toward the tree line where the lower trail disappeared into the mountains. "I was left to freeze as Clara Whitmore," she said, "but I came home as Clara Boone." Elias reached for her hand, and she took it. The mountain had almost become her grave. Instead, it became her shelter. The man people called wild had shown her the gentlest kind of strength. In the valley where her old life ended, Clara found a new one, built not by blood, but by loyalty, courage, and a love strong enough to stand through any storm.